Hello and welcome to Conversations with Hannah. I am joined by the gentleman that formerly used to have Off the Beaten Path as his show here in Shrewsbury. And as many of you may have seen in the paper last week, Beaton is stepping down as the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs, or as I prefer to call you, the Commonwealth's Chief Hunter, Fisher, and Gatherer, because I think that's much more appropriate for you. You had some exciting news. I'm sure it's bittersweet. I keep telling everyone that there's one person stepping out of the Shrewsbury commuter line group going in to the State House. But tell us what your exciting news is. What are you going to be doing next?
I am pursuing a great opportunity that came my way at a company called TRC. It's a large national engineering, environmental services, consulting, construction management company. And I'm going over there to do some management consulting and primarily to build a renewable energy division inside the company.
That's awesome. Good for you. That will be a great fit. And you did a ton of work in your secretariat. You sort of had the two sides, right? The energy and the environmental affairs. On the energy side, you did a lot of great work diversifying our energy portfolio here in the Commonwealth. Tell us a little bit about that and what you were able to accomplish.
Yeah, so when we came in 2015, we looked at all of the challenges really facing the energy industry, particularly in Massachusetts. We are obviously in New England, but we operate in a New England electricity market. So we, as a region, have some of the highest cost of energy in the entire nation. And you can imagine what that does to our businesses. It puts us at an economic disadvantage when competing to retain or grow or bring new companies in. So we were very mindful of the high cost of energy. But at the same time, we also wanted to make sure that we stay firmly committed to the terms of the Global Warming Solutions Act, which requires the Commonwealth to see a reduction in its overall emissions, carbon equivalent emissions, but by the year 2050, a reduction of 80%. So obviously a large area of emissions is the electric generation sector, the use of energy in our buildings, and things of that nature. So we wanted to really make sure that we implemented policies that were mindful of both the cost and meeting those targets in the most economically efficient way possible. There's one other third basic tenet we used in shaping all of our energy policies, and that was reliability. And that really plays in the regional basis. All of these things really touch that regional market, but in particular the reliability for the whole grid was something that we were very cognizant of and needing to work in concert with both the other states and ISO New England, which is the electric grid operator. So and the reason that was a concern is we have a number of retirements. We just lost our, I wouldn't say lost, but as a success, shut down our last coal plant in Massachusetts. But that was 1,600 megawatts of energy that we relied on. Pilgrim shuts off next week. That's a nuclear power station in Plymouth. And a number of other reliable sort of energy sources that have been there for decades are no longer with us. So we needed to make sure that resources coming online could provide power when we need them. And that's one of the challenges with renewable energy is the main renewable energy sources that we know today are largely intermittent and can't be relied upon on a regular basis. So you blend all these things together and you go out and you look and what are our options, and we shaped a policy around what the governor dubbed a combo platter.
Yeah.
And that was really another way of saying a diversified energy portfolio and a strategy that we put forward. So we pursued a number of different options, and one of the biggest central pieces that we worked on was in 2016, Governor Baker signed into law an energy diversification bill, which was something that we worked really hard for really a couple of years to pass, and not just pass, but make sure it passed in the right way, that it set up a competitive framework for new resources to enter the market in a way that they once never were able to. And what that ultimately meant was we were able to pursue the two largest single procurements by themselves, separately, the largest procurements of renewable energy in the Commonwealth's history. And the first is the construction of a transmission line from Canada, from Quebec, down into Massachusetts. It opened it up into any resource could play. Ultimately what won is a Hydro-Quebec contract coming down into New England. That ran through, or is going to run through, the state of Maine. And that would be for 1,200 megawatts of hydroelectricity. And the beauty of hydroelectricity is it's one of these rare silver bullets where it hits all three of those things, that cost, carbon, and reliability that I talked about earlier. And it is a great resource that came in at an incredibly effective price because of the competitive nature of the procurement process that we put forward. And that is well underway. It just received a major approval in Maine for siting of the transmission line. It has approval at our Department of Public Utilities, and it's off and running, and it has a really good path forward to be constructed. And that's going to be one of the most singular, important resources we bring online in the New England region. It's large, it's cost-effective, it helps us with our greenhouse gas reductions, and it's reliable. It basically runs 24/7.
And when would that be coming online?
Probably in about a year and a half, I would say. By the time the final permitting gets going and thing gets built out, it should be right around 2020, 2021. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah, so that was one element of that bill. The other element, it was a big bill, so there were plenty of other elements to it, but the other really significant piece was allowing our public utilities to go out and procure 1,600 megawatts of offshore wind. We put a solicitation forward, and before I get into that, to put it into context, in Massachusetts, on a day like today, beautiful day out, nobody's using AC, we're not, it's not cold, we're not heating things. We're probably using about 7,000 megawatts in Massachusetts. So when you take that 1,200 megawatts and the 1,600 megawatts, it's a pretty significant piece of the
It's
pie.
almost half of the need.
Right. So we currently have underway, we put a competitive bid process out, and in a really innovative way that was really, really focused on driving that price down as low as possible. And we thought we were going to see, we had Cape Wind a while back, which for all intents and purposes was a bit of a disaster, but there was no competition. It was a single bidder.
Yeah.
And pricing was changed over time, but closer to like 20 cents a kilowatt hour. In the competitive process that we got out, we were expecting 9, 10 cents. We got 6.5 cents a kilowatt hour. It actually sent shockwaves down the whole eastern seaboard because everybody was waiting to see what was going to happen in Massachusetts before they went on their own. So we really set the stage for a hyper-competitive process across the eastern seaboard. But the 800 megawatts that are currently underway right now in a very similar manner, stage of the hydro procurement, will be the largest offshore wind development in our nation. And that's going to be an incredibly important resource for us. It is intermittent and there's a 50% capacity factor, so 50% of it you can't always control when it's on.
Sure.
So that's going to, it's not as reliable, but as more of it gets built out and as we incorporate storage, which was another priority of the administration, those are, going to be very, very necessary resources that we're going to rely on to produce our baseload power and incorporate all those other technologies to really give us a product that could be really useful the way we need it. There are a whole other elements. We maintained our number one status in energy efficiency for 8 years in a row in Massachusetts. So any fuel that you don't use is really the best fuel possible. Right. So we're really proud of our energy efficiency programs in Massachusetts. And we made a lot of changes to that program. Incentives for passive house.
Shocking that would have come up in your...
Yeah. And we created a new storage program that really got a lot of national attention that was started off with basically a study and a report of an assessment of the possibility of storage, what kind of storage, there's different applications of storage that you could use. And then we went off with a $20 million pilot program to really get a lot of these projects up and started. And the response to that was incredible. That industry is off and running. Storage is going to play an integral role in
well, and I remember in my first term, you and Michael Hale from Selco and I went over to Westboro, to one of the companies over there who was working on energy storage. I think what's so great, Matt, is when you were in the legislature, you were so well regarded by everyone as being an expert in this area, and you carried that over to the administration. And so when a lot of this legislation was moving through, people really had a strong sense that you knew what you were doing. And that helped, I think, move these pieces of legislation forward. And you are somebody who is going to be deeply missed on Beacon Hill, not just by the people that you work with on a day-to-day basis, but certainly my colleagues as well, who think of you in such high regard and who clearly don't know you very well.
Yeah, exactly. No, but to that point, and actually, the experience of having the 4 years as rep beforehand, particularly rolling into we had a solar reform legislation as well, and the whole solar program that we rolled out was it's a whole nother story. But it was a really innovative way we cut the cost of solar in half and actually increased the pace of solar development at the same time. And that was really important because we had some of the highest, most costly incentives in the nation. We needed to do something about it. So we simultaneously were moving both of those bills in that what would be your first session as a rep right after I was in there. And there's no question that having the relationships in that building were, really helpful in seeing those bills forward. So that time was really valuable. I really enjoyed it, and built a lot of lifetime friendships out of that experience.
Well, and these areas are complex ones, so they're not easy. One of the things that you learn as a legislator is you all come to the table with some different skill sets, but also different knowledge in different areas, and you rely on each other. You figure out who knows what they're talking about and who doesn't, and who do you go to. And so, I think that you will be missed as a person just to call up. I know I did it multiple times. So we would be dealing with legislation to just say, can you walk me through this? Can you help me make sure I understand this correctly? Or what are questions I should be asking? But I think probably having campaigned through the worst winter ever, with all of the snow, and then seeing a lot of the other things that have happened climate-wise in the Commonwealth in the last 4 years, another thing that you did, certainly with the governor and lieutenant governor's leadership as well, was thinking through how do we as a Commonwealth ensure that we are appropriately responding to the changes in the climate? Like, what do we need to do? How do we need to think about this? And also not just thinking about it from a coastal perspective. A lot of people think climate change and they think it's just a coastal community issue, and it's really not.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about what you did relative to creating first a director, I think, of climate change, and then an undersecretary, but also the programmatic response that you guys put into place to deal with the climate change issues.
Yeah. So, you nailed it. Just from a anecdotal sort of what we experienced over our time in the administration was something that really just opened everybody's eyes and got us laser focused. We had the 10 feet of snow, we had the worst drought on record, we had tornadoes in February, we had one of the rainiest falls, now a really rainy spring, and there are cycles to this. There are natural cycles where you're going to have elements like this, but there's no question that things are changing, right? And so we really started looking at our climate policies, and I always put, in a simplistic way, climate issues in two buckets: mitigation and adaptation and resiliency. Mitigation is sort of that stuff of the Global Warming Solutions Act that I talked about before. It's mitigating our contribution of the things that make climate change happen, CO2 equivalent emissions. And we've done a great job in Massachusetts, and we're on a good trajectory to hit our targets and make significant reductions in our emissions profile. But where we didn't really have anything in place was around the adaptation and resiliency. And we looked at this as more and more important, particularly as we, all became far too familiar with bombogenesis and polar vortex, and just year after year just getting pounded on the coast is really where we saw it. But then think back, a little 2011, Hurricane Irene, and that was really an interior storm that wreaked havoc, particularly in the Connecticut River Valley, Pioneer Valley, and those communities really woke up to the effects of climate change and these intense storms. So we basically said, we got to do something about this, and what are we going to do about it? Well, it all started with, we were kind of scouring our agencies, figuring out what everybody was already working on and doing, and then we said we really need to solidify this. And really what it started with was I had an undersecretary of environment, an undersecretary of energy, and made a relatively bold move and said, let's create an undersecretary of climate change. And we hired Katie Theoharides, who has subsequently been appointed as my successor when I left last
named her
week.
Climate Katie right away.
Climate
So
Katie.
No
was
one
a
could say the
name that
last
stuck.
name, so you might
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. Very tricky last name, Theoharides. But she is going to have to change her Twitter handle too, because it says Climate Katie. But she hit the ground running, and then it really just snowballed into so many great things. And we proposed to the governor an executive order, and the lieutenant governor, relative to climate adaptation and resiliency. And it was met with, just incredible embrace by the governor and the lieutenant governor, and they thought it was a great idea, and we pursued it and crafted this executive order, which set up a couple of things. It set up a statewide hazard mitigation climate adaptation plan, which took some work from MEMA, our emergency management agency, in a submittal that they put forward to FEMA every year about hazard assessments, right? Sure. And it was a natural fit. So what we did was we created a sort of internal working group across every secretariat, across all of state government, where myself and the Secretary of Public Safety through MEMA served as the chairs, and each one of our secretaries appointed a team that would work on really doing a vulnerability assessment inside each of their agencies. I think there's 90 agencies across state government or something like that. And maybe it's 40. I forget. Don't quote me on that one.
You've been gone, what, 5 days?
Yeah, exactly. But there was a lot of work that went into this assessment, and then we sort of rolled that work into the regular annual assessment, and it came back with FEMA. The comments from FEMA were like, "Holy cow, this is really cool." And we want to start doing this around the rest of the country. And it was a really effective approach for us to just really get a sense of what are we dealing with as a state, right? But then we said, okay, state work, that's good. We need to do something on the local level. And we created the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, where we essentially had a pool of money where we put out to communities that signed up to be MVP communities, and we trained trainers, right? And these people are a lot of environmental consultants, engineers, things like that, and we trained them in what we were looking for as a final product to be submitted in this greater body of work that would help us to understand our vulnerabilities as a Commonwealth. And that they would go into a community, and we participated in Shrewsbury's, and it was really eye-opening, and it was pretty awesome to see Shrewsbury's participation because, we had folks from school department, we had folks from, police and fire, and, every element of government in Shrewsbury played a role in this, and that was exactly what we wanted to see, and it was pretty cool to see our own community doing it the right way and being successful in it. So trainer came in, and it was a big process to talk as a community about what are vulnerable assets, and it could be a culvert, it could be a dam, it could be a whole host of issues. Whether you're an interior community, a coastal community, every town is going to be different. And long story short, we just hit in a little over 2 years. We just hit the other day. I got a text yesterday actually saying we hit 71% of the communities across the Commonwealth participating in this program in 2.5 years. It's incredible. It's actually, so you can imagine the wave of work that created. And now we've created, essentially built on the undersecretary role of climate change and built out this office. The governor's executive order became statute in the environmental bond bill a couple years ago. And, it's really hit the ground running. The MVP program has been wildly successful. And now we're putting out, so when we first did the planning phase, so the planning's nice, but really, how are we going to fix this stuff, right? And it's going to be a big ticket item. And we are now in the first phase of actually getting money out to the communities to start doing a lot of these projects. And they're very much infrastructure projects, right? It's in a lot of ways, it's an infrastructure approach to dealing with
Well,
these
and
issues.
I think, the best way for me to understand it was the example of the culvert. And what happens if you have a huge storm and you have undersized culverts, you can't take the flow, and then the road wipes out, and then you can't get, emergency vehicles or anyone to, whoever's stranded there or whatever's going on. And I think, we just don't think that way. It's not a common thing for people to think about.
Right.
But once that was the example for me, I remember growing up in Maine, we lived on a dirt road. There were enormous culverts on 2 parts of the road that I was on that hardly ever got used to capacity.
Yeah.
But when they did, when those storms came and that body of water went through it, it was the only way. We were the only house that would get cut off if we didn't have those culverts there.
Wow.
And so it's very funny how when you say something like that, it makes people think of, okay, I can understand that. I understand that climate change of having much more water and that many more storms coming through has to mean that we look at things like that.
Right.
And that's a simplistic example, but it's the type of example I can understand.
But it's like probably one of the most relevant examples. It's a really powerful it's powerful for a reason, because every community has, I think there's 30,000 culverts across the Commonwealth, and there's about 3,000 dams, and dams are, from the industrial era.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're old, and we really have a lot of aged infrastructure. We're at a really unique place in New England, and there are also all the climate projections predict that New England is going to feel an acceleration of the effects of climate change more than any other region in the world, and we're already seeing it in the Gulf of Maine. It's the fastest warming water body in the world.
And it's really the economic challenges that it presents as well, right? So it's not just the actual in the moment of the storm, it's what happens afterwards. And, we had a very unfortunate incident last year up in the Merrimack Valley with Lawrence and North Andover and Andover with the gas explosions, and sort of, what that set off in terms of triggering other events, and the impact, not only certainly to the young man who lost his life tragically, but to the devastation to the houses, the impact to business owners and what it did to their business, and then certainly displacing people for months out of their homes until they could move back in there. And you were really part of the core team that led from the first day that it happened of, how do we get people back home again? So can you tell us a little bit about, we all saw what was in the news, but the actual inner working of figuring out, okay, this is what we have in front of us. How do we make this right?
Yeah, it was a pretty wild story, but Thursday, September 13th last year, I remember I was at an event with WPI with a bunch of people, and my phone blows up, like not figuratively, and all about this gas stuff. I'm saying, holy cow, what's going on? Fast forward to get home, making lunches, sitting around the table. I get on a conference call with the governor and team, and making sandwiches, and then all of a sudden, like the magnitude of, like, I was obviously watching the news and trying to figure out what the heck was going on, but it was like, holy cow, right? And it was an emergency response situation. So at first my reaction was, okay, my job's really going to start tomorrow. I got to stay away because let the first responders do their work. But then it became immediately clear, like, my job starts right now. So I got in the car, drove up Thursday night, and then that first 72 hours was, I didn't sleep for those first 72 hours. I went home Sunday night, and it was probably the most intense time I've ever had in my life, where it was just the speed at which decisions need to get made was just incredible, right? Because everybody was going through this the first time, and nobody had ever experienced anything like this. The three communities were in desperate need of support of the state. We unfortunately had a utility who was not prepared to deal with this issue in any significant manner. Wonderful people, just not prepared.
Sure.
And so within the first 24 hours, myself and a couple of other folks were back and forth, and I really engaged with the utility and tried to figure out what is going on. Where are your resources? What is your plan? How are you going about doing this? And it became quickly clear that there was no plan and it was not going to be successful. And it was really just in dealing with the original, that first hour of stabilizing the situation. We needed to make sure all the gas was shut off, but because a lot of these things were interacting with the electricity, right? When you have gas, we had to make sure that the electricity is off in every one of these houses, which is a different utility. So the coordination of all these things really needed to happen. And then, so we needed to shut all that down, shut all the gas off, and then once all the gas off, and we checked all the gas off in every single one of these houses, we could then restore the electricity. And you can imagine the boots on the ground that were needed to do this. So the impacted area ultimately ended up being about 10,000 homes and about 300 businesses, and 388, I think it was. And we went in, and we, in that initial time frame, had to, first time this has ever happened in the country, was take the rights to restore this situation away from one utility and gave it to another utility in Eversource. They helped us stabilize that situation, and then the real work started after that. We had to design a whole new structure where we put a gentleman named Joe Albanese from Commodore Construction at the top of it. We sort of oversaw that. We created this whole unbelievable framework and basically put the fire engine, built it on the way to the fire. We were getting people out in the field and trying to do this as quickly as possible. And of course the media only reported, oh, you're behind schedule, you're this, you're that. But to be there and to see how thousands of people working together to create this engine of this thing that went in and replaced all the gas appliances in 10,000 houses and fixed everything in all the businesses and repaired, 50 miles of road pipe in 29 days. Nothing like that's ever happened anywhere. It was insane. And it was such an amazing experience to be part of. It was obviously a horrible tragedy, but to see these people come together and see these communities come together was a really remarkable time.
Well, and the thing that you don't tell people, but I like to tell people, is that you also made sure that you never forgot the people who weren't able to get back in their home. So you did not take a warm shower for as long as the last person who couldn't take one in their own home did. And I think, taking a cold shower every morning is a pretty stark reminder about the responsibility that you're carrying to get these people back. So I think it speaks volumes about you. And you've mentioned several times in our conversation just now that a lot of the work that you did was leading the country. So whether it was the energy diversification and the procurement of some of these contracts and the costs that you were able to get it at, to the work around the climate change issues and being sure that we're not waiting long to respond to what we know is coming, is really impressive. And certainly your response and the Baker Polito administration's response to working with people to get everyone back to where they needed to be and ensure that everyone understands that's what they're working towards too, like communicating that at the same time. I was on a task force on a separate issue with the mayor of Lawrence, and he could not speak highly enough about the work that you did. And so I know that everyone up there, they may not know your name, but they are back where they need to be because of the work that you helped lead. So I wanted to save the best part of your job for last, which is overseeing a lot of our incredible outdoor spaces in the Commonwealth, our parks, our recreation opportunities. I know that anyone who knows you knows that you have such an incredible passion for the outdoors and for the Commonwealth as a whole. And you made sure as part of your job that you spend plenty of time in the great outdoors of the Commonwealth. So this time under legit business reason for being there. So tell us a bit about your favorite parts of the Commonwealth and the work that your secretariat had to oversee these.
Well, I always knew we lived in a beautiful state. I never realized how beautiful our state was till I had this opportunity. It just opened up so many doors to meet people and to understand regions a little bit better, but to really explore what we have here in Massachusetts. And it's incredible. When you go out to Western Mass, you go to the coastal area, there's just such a variety that's so unique to really anywhere in the world. That's, I was just fly fishing in a river last Monday, and you feel like you're in Montana when you're out there. And, we can go skiing and we can, great camping opportunities and beautiful hiking, and there's just so many wonderful things. But I did spend a heck of a lot of time. I tried to get to, camp at most of the campgrounds. Really had to twist my arm on that one. And I hunted and I fished as much as I could. And
yeah, I think the most shocking thing you ever told me is when you had a dead deer in the back of your truck at the Commonwealth parking garage because you were going to drop it off later on.
Yep.
That was...
I had one in Lawrence once, too. I snuck in a morning there once.
Well, I think what was great about it was also that, you had the opportunity to have your family along, and I loved always seeing the pictures of the kids out in the outdoors. And I think the last thing, we have like 30 seconds left, but one of the last things you did was bring in Sam's St. Mary's class, and Lily came along as well, and it was great to have them in the Commonwealth, State House. But I really think that it also illustrates the fact that you're such a great dad and family man, and so I'm really glad that others in this great Commonwealth had the opportunity to experience your leadership, and I know you're going to do really well in your next endeavor, but I'm certainly going to miss seeing you. Actually, generally you were running into me at the State House because you were always late for something, but
Yep, pretty much.
I will miss seeing you in that capacity. But on behalf of everyone in the Commonwealth, thank you for the great work that you did
Thank you.
for all of us.
Thank you. And thank you for the great work you're doing in making me look like a bad state representative with the great work that you do.
I didn't need help in that. But congratulations. You did an excellent job.
Thank you very much.